So I met both Jane and Becky Holland when I was a curatorial assistant at Exit Art in the early 1990s. Jane I met at her studio on 43rd Street, which is where I saw her series of drawings and paintings of New Year's Eve revelers for the first time. Jane's revelers were like figures tossed to and fro in the waves of euphoria and drunkenness that marks that annual ritual in Times Square. To me, New Year's Eve in Times Square was a TV event. People were indistinguishable. Jane took a different view. Her figures are isolated and magnified, a parade of celebrants living it up because why not? This duality of purpose, a figurative record and a question, how did we get here, is filtered across her work, and I was hooked. I met Becky when she was installing her artwork at Exit Art's massive all-female artist show, 1920, held in 1993. She had made drawings delicate with a bite, depicting what at first I thought was an anatomical drawing of a female pelvis. Looking more closely with Becky as my guide, she pointed out the Dalcon shield, or IUD, situated within the rendering. The Dalcon shield was a popular birth control method, but it wasn't safe. It led to infections and a series of health complications for women, but because the company wasn't regulated, they didn't pull the product from the market until a class action lawsuit. Becky's drawings were astonishing, beautiful and disturbing, distressing in their sensitivity and frank about the danger of today's world. For the duration of that exhibit, I thought about this combination of innocence and malice. As you will soon see, Becky and Jane's artwork is exquisitely layered, like the best narratives, and that they make you think. Jane was born in Chicago and received her BFA from Harvard College, where she also took courses at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. She came to New York in the mid-1970s, where she found work in animation as a cell painter and also in the electronic computer-generated Spectra color billboard, which broadcast ads from its perch at One Times Square. Jane created an animated ad for the 1980 Times Square show, and later in 1984, Jane curated the Public Art Fund's now legendary project with Spectra Board, Messages to the Public, in which artists made announcements that were interspersed among the stream of ads. Jane's paintings used non-traditional materials as the support. Black garbage bags, astroturf, sandpaper, textured vinyl, and other industrial materials. Those surfaces lend her paintings a pixelated quality. She aligns painting with its history and with our electronic present, how we see today. Jane was a founding member of Collaborative Projects, or CoLab, a collective we'll discuss in our conversation. She has exhibited her work in numerous exhibits across the US and abroad. Jane's most recent solo show, Buildings and Dicks, was held this summer at Boo Hooray in Montauk. Jane is represented by Stephen Harvey Fine Arts Projects. Becky Holland was born in Niagara Falls in upstate New York and received her BFA from Syracuse University. She came to New York and worked for sculptor Nancy Graves and was then a fellow in the Whitney Museum's legendary independent study program in the mid-1970s. Becky also has an MFA from Bard College. She was a co-founder and president of CoLab and also a founder of ABC No Rio, a community art space still active on the Lower East Side. In addition to works on paper, Becky is a sculptor and a painter. She has participated in numerous group shows across New York and abroad. Her most recent solo show, Weeds of New York, was held at the Moiety Gallery in Brooklyn last year. And one of Becky's transmission towers, originally part of a series that was shown in 1986 at PS1 Contemporary Art Center, was included in MoMA PS1's Mark Leckie show earlier this year. So both Jane and Becky will share their artwork with us via slides, and then we will sit and have a conversation that will hopefully trace their decades-long friendship, work, ideas, and what it's been like to maintain studios downtown. Thanks. And we'll start with Jane, I thought, alphabetically, and then we'll go.
Thank you. That was an awesome intro, Melissa. I just want to clarify that I was not a founder of CoLab. I was an early member. which I think maybe all of us
Sorry.
here were. No, it's fine. I'm happy to be promoted. Lately, that keeps coming up, but Collab existed when I realized I went to its first show, so I was there fairly close, but I wasn't in the first show. I wasn't in until the second show.
Got it.
We have to get to Colleen to get who founded it,
Yeah,
but
same
that's
here.
another
Same
story.
here. I'm not
We
a
were
founder of Collab.
right. We were important contributors, but not founders. So I'm going to just quickly run through 15 slides to give us the sort of ambiance, and then maybe we'll want to, after you talk yours, we may want to just run them as we're talking.
Oh, that sounds fun.
So I've pulled together some images of work that I did of this neighborhood back in the day and a few photos of us back in the day. This is a drawing of Ryder's Alley, which at that point we lived in 64 Fulton Street, which is the building to the left. This was probably 78 because I'm using chalk. I moved to Tribeca. I got a job as an animator, cell painter at 391 Broadway, and answered an ad in the Soho Weekly News and got half of a loft on Duane Street. I was facing Duane Park, which at that point was a slab of concrete with burned barrels and homeless guys. So anyway, after a year, I moved in with my now husband, and we shared a bathroom with Cindy Sherman, who was on the other side of the hallway there. There were a lot of artists that lived in the building on this side and on that side. So anyway, it was kind of bleak and dark. We can go ahead now to the next one. This was what the subway entrance looked like on Fulton Street back in the 70s. I was already working at this. After a year doing cell painting over here, I got this job on the first digital light board in Times Square, and that meant making lights on a dark, the screen itself was black and I could turn on different lights. And I thought, it's just my day job, it will never influence my artwork, which I didn't even know what my artwork was yet. But I came home and I started painting things black. And I was working the night shift on weekends, and I, got hypnotized by the lights, and I'm still working that out. So this was I did a little piece of masonite, painted it black, and then, because I was making images just with lights, I started going, okay, if I paint the canvas black, or use a black garbage bag, or whatever, I could just paint the lights. So I was replicating in this old-fashioned media what I was doing in the new. So let's go ahead. The World Trade Center was a major landmark at that point. This one is, I have two versions of it. One is on garbage bag, and the second one is on textured vinyl, gray vinyl wall covering. So the gray at the bottom is the color it was. When we lived on Fulton Street, we always had to walk west, and that was my line of sight. And at that point, all of the Wall Street area, all the businesses had moved out of the little old rundown buildings and moved into the World Trade Center, where everything was nice and new, which made a great haven for artists. When I moved in with Charlie, our loft, which, like I said, didn't have its own bathroom, it was an office building, but we paid $180 a month. So then I only paid $90, and as soon as I was there, and it was a tiny loft. I happened to be in an elevator, and I heard this guy from the Dutch Reformed Church, which owned all those buildings around Lower Manhattan, had been, early members of the church had given them to the church. And he was showing someone offices to rent, and I said, oh, can I follow with you? And I rented from him for another $100 a month, an office in the building at Broadway and John Street. So I know this isn't Tribeca, it's a little further south. But it's where their new whole MTA Fulton hub is, and they've kept that building, just the facade of it. So anyway. And at the time I went to look, he was like, well, you could have this room, or it was all empty. So we came into New York at a moment where this neighborhood had been emptied out. So let's zip along. San Gennaro, was an early interest. Again, a lot of lights in the darkness. We can keep zipping along. I was borrowing Susan Pitt's, who had been my teacher and then my boss. This was where we had worked on animation, and she had gone away for the summer. And back in the day, because places were so cheap, I go, can I use your studio while you're away? And they go, sure. And maybe I paid her $100 a month for that. I don't know. So this is before I went down to John Street. And that's, the block just below Canal, and there's an alley there. So that's what I look like. And because I was using other people's, I was a studio gypsy, so I would paint on unstretched canvas, because then I could just roll it up and take it home after a month. So let's keep zipping along. I also was working up in the South Bronx. Our mutual friends we were interested in moving out of the art world, which at that point was very small anyway, and this was a collaborative graffiti project that I did in the South Bronx. Let's keep going. And look who's there. Becky, that's Becky up at Fashion Moda in the South Bronx. So I honestly don't remember how we met, but we've been friends and in the same circle. That's Bobby, yeah. It's Bobby and Becky at Fashion Moda, and so I don't know, that might be in the 80s.
1980.
Yeah.
I remember the dress.
I love that dress. It's a great dress.
Becky was always incredibly glamorous looking. So, and then Becky is going to tell about her whole history, but it was a part of Collab, which John here was part of, and we all were making up wacky ideas and pitching in with each other's ideas. Let's go to the next one. And this was a project that Christy Rupp did at the space that Becky organized, that I participated in, and I just had this slide, which I don't even think I
Nice.
Is
took.
that a chicken?
A chicken?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that was animals living in the city.
Which was volume 2. She had done it first at Fashion Moda in the Bronx, and I had participated then, and I think I participated in this version. Let's go on.
That's just the
Oh,
little
go
girl
back.
who lived upstairs, Maria, that's her. In the other slide. I'd love to
Okay.
get a copy of that sometime. And I'm in it too, facing backwards.
I
Anyways,
was trying to go,
ahead.
this is your life. This is our life.
Yes.
In this slide, I have no idea whose feet I'm holding or who's taking the photo, but I just thought it's somebody here, and
Whose house is it?
I think it might be Mimi Gross's house.
Maybe that's Mimi taking the picture.
It might be Mimi.
Look at that camera.
Yeah, or it could be Terry Swatkin. I don't know
Do you
why.
think that's Mimi?
That's an amazing camera. I mean,
That's
it's
makes
got
me-
bellows on it.
Well, we have to ask her. So I have no idea what we were doing. It just wasn't. I brought it because I thought we did a lot of wacky collaborations, and I have no idea why, but I look good in that picture, so I like, I'll bring it. That I'm putting pictures of glamorous young Becky. I'll put in some of me too. So next one, another one of this was a performance at ABC No Rio that Joe Lewis did, which somehow required a bunch of us to be in bikinis that were made by Cookie Mueller. It was
I don't remember.
it was a camouflage bikini, and I just had to show it to go, yes, I once looked like that. And I'm holding a cigarette because that was part of the performance, or I thought it was important to look like I smoked cigarettes. I actually I tried occasionally, but I never managed to smoke. But anyway, so onward, and this is this billboard that I worked at. So while I lived on Duane Street from 77 to 78, and then Fulton Street till 81. And 81, someone had opened the laundry loft, which was a laundromat. It was the first time we didn't have to all go to Chinatown to wash our clothes. And Charlie and I decided it was too bougie here, so we moved to Times Square. And we lived in Times Square, where my wonderful son and his sister were both born. I was working on this billboard, and most of my work focuses on Times Square, but then there was a moment when my parents kept going, you can't really raise them in Times Square. You know, we were living above the mailbox and the playpen, and it was more than colorful. My parents would go, they're gonna start asking what those items are in the window there of the playpen. So we were trying to move back downtown, but we had to wait until '92 when there was a real estate crunch. And then we moved to Hubert Street, where I've been ever since. And at that point, by the '90s, some of my friends referred to this neighborhood as Triburbia, because it was lots of us were starting to have children. There was a good PS234, and thank you that there is. And, you know, and there were people fighting to stop Westway from, you know, making Hubert Street into an on-ramp, et cetera. So let's go ahead. I think we're almost done. And this is what I looked like also when I was in a memory lane mood when I put these together. This is the view from when I lived on 43rd Street. That's Show World across the street, and back behind it is Port Authority. So we lived on the corner of 43rd and 8th. It doesn't look like that anymore. And neither do I. Oh, but well, anyway, behind me is a skull, which Tom Otterness was lending me this skull, which he had somehow borrowed from the Museum of Natural History, where he was a guard. And I'm sure he's returned it by now. Because I wanted to draw skulls, and Tom is like, oh, I've got a skull here. So I had the skull on my desk, and I did a bunch of fans that I would set up the skull, and I would paint these black fans with skulls, and we sold them at different stores. And this is a picture that Nan Golden took of me, which is why I look glamorous in it, because I knew her from college. Okay, and last, this is a loft on Broadway and Reed Street, I think. It was Jolie Stahl's loft, and Becky Holland is on the far right. I'm the very pregnant one. It was a baby shower for my son Joe, who's now 31, so that tells you how far back we're going. Kiki Smith, Claudia Gould is the director of the Jewish Museum, Ann Messner, Jody Kochen.
Colleen in the red.
Colleen Fitzgibbon in the red, Susan Pitt on the right, my friend Susan Hodara who's a journalist, Janet Stein, who's in a lot of Nan's pictures, and Uli Rimkus. So this is what, you know, this was a nice loft in Tribeca at that point. Most of our lofts were really funky, and I think that's my last one. Is it? No? Oh, and here's Martha Wilson, you know, of Franklin Furnace fame. Franklin Furnace was on Franklin Street, right in this neighborhood, and, you know, she was a pioneer. It was a performance space. It was a huge loft, raw ground floor loft. She lived in the back in very rough conditions, and, you know, gradually Franklin Furnace had a wonderful artist book archive that they sold or donated to MoMA, PS1.
The library.
To the library. And then they became virtual, but they're still, you know, yeah, now it's part of Pratt, but it's still a really dynamic institution, and I'm proud that we've, you know, known Martha. We knew her when. And this was I got invited to do this huge MTA mosaic project in Times Square, and there was a party when it was unveiled, and Martha came, and because she's a performer, she hammed it up, and it was a great photo. So I thought, okay, this sort of gives you an idea of, you know, for me, it's always been downtown, midtown, downtown, and probably that's the last one, right? Okay.
Thank you. Actually, I brought a couple of things. My instinct was to bring things instead of slides, but I have a fair number of slides in there, but these were things I did in the fall. And I took them, I made the drawings at, actually, this one I made the painting. Oh, there's like a drawing workshop at Shandankin Projects. They have a little office over on East 4th Street with Creative Time. And I took a little notebook, and then they had paper and paint, and I made a full-size image of this. And then I made Xeroxes of it and took it on marches. I marched a lot right after the election. But this is part of the same. And that's when I met Allison, who's gonna, Allison Ginger. He still hasn't shown them, yeah. So I haven't done many portraits of people, but I've done octopuses. So when that woman was describing his predatory, as he was an octopus, I really responded to it. And this one I really, because he's selling steaks while he's got this side business which still continues with his hotel. I mean, we just have never seen corruption on this level. So I'm happy I did. Oh, I got one other little thing. This was from an old drawing, or one that I did of my towers in 1988. And with two little baby skeletons hooked to it, because when I was making these towers, there was such I don't know if it's true, but I tend to think it is, that there's a lot of danger from electromagnetic radiation on these towers. So I was, during Mark Lecky's show, someone had been telling me the year before to make a t-shirt out of this. And so what I did is make these little labels. It's one of my most subversive works, because they're on clear labels. And I just sort of put them around on electrical outlets, because nobody really knows where electricity comes from. But it's, a lot of my pieces have been about fossil fuels and strip mining. The last show I did, the last solo show, was at a little gallery called 24/7 on Stanton Street. Anyways, James she said she would like to see one of my early pieces around here. So this was a little bit earlier. This is from 1977. And look at those cars. Yeah. But this was in the traffic island right near here. It's just like a half a block away. It's where Franklin and West Broadway and Varick meet. And
is that where the hotel is now?
It's across the street from the hotel. It's just south of the hotel. So I was renting studio space from John Ahern. John Ahern's in the house. And so I would go and do these very temporary public works. And there were these tall grasses growing, and I just tied them up into these hoops. It lasted maybe a day or something. I don't know. Then, actually, this is 77. In 81, Richard Serra made this huge sculpture. It was 3 planes. I don't know if anyone remembers it. Yeah. And it was in that same spot. And then I didn't know this till recently, but David Hammonds is the one he threw sneakers over the top of that, and then he did a performance piece of peeing into one of the corners of it, which is so great. I looked at Greg Allen's blog, and I learned about the peeing. I went, wow, that's the same place. Okay, anyways. That's how I got started in Tribeca, actually, working here with my studio on Franklin Street. And I came to New York. I got a job working for Nancy Graves, and she's the one who told me about the Whitney program. So, anyways, if you change, then this is a little bit later. This is again another traffic island. This is Canal Street. This is called Portrait of a Gas Station, and my sculpture is that little thing in the front. which mimics the architecture of the mobile gas station, which is, it's like Peter Fenn calls it a triangle in a triangle. And that was my first version. A lot of the buildings aren't there anymore. That 100 building isn't there. The church isn't there. But the gas, now it's called Crave. But this is my first version. And I did another version that Charlie Ahern encouraged me to do. I made a permanent, that's made of plaster. He said, you gotta embed it in the stone. So I made a cement one with rebar sticking out of it, and he helped me take it over in a shopping cart, in a grocery cart, and we dug up the stones and cast cement in there and plopped it in. And it must have stayed there for 15 years.
Yeah, it was there for years and
years. It
years.
was like, oh, there's my sculpture.
It started to get worn at the corners, but it was permanent.
Exactly. So finally someone removed it, but I can still go and I can see like the little bits of rebar. Someone had to chop it up. Anyway, so that was 78 that was 77 and 78. So it was kind of great. It was just a great time. People did stuff, we weren't displacing anybody. We were just using, empty spaces that were the factories had been abandoned. So there were all these worries about the city going bankrupt. So we weren't displacing anybody. And it was fun, we were all running wild in the street. In a way. Okay, next slide. And though that's another view of it, where the X is. But you see, the World Trade Centers, which in the beginning it was these despised things, they were so ugly, so, and they were everywhere,
And dominating.
They dominate, yeah, that was the intent, So later I really did learn to love them, but I was certainly sad when they went down. Okay. Now that is the view from the Williamsburg Bridge, the promenade of the Williamsburg Bridge, which, it's funny because I feel like a historian just because, from getting older, but not very much of that exists anymore. But this I just wanted to give you, I worked with a group of artists and did a show called the Real Estate Show, and this is that building. And then I did a sculpture show on the promenade here, but this was always, such a prominent feature. Jane was in the real estate show. Maybe John was too. Okay, next one. Please. That's our press conference, like much after maybe a week after the real estate show. It was a show about real estate, how things had changed for artists in Soho and Tribeca, and really the Lower East Side had started, but so we broke in and did a show about real estate. So the act itself and the art were both about real estate, and then the city, the building happened to be owned by the city, it was abandoned. So they retook it, and then we held a press conference. We want it back. We just want to do a show for a couple of weeks. Why don't you just... And so we were lucky because that's Joseph Boys, and who came to our show in solidarity. About half the people working on the show were German, and so they'd been Joseph Boys students. And so he came, and it meant a lot. We got then the next one. Oh, and I did this octopus on the back, and then which is a big thing on painted paper, and then. We got press. This is in the New York Times. So we had this, we were like a little more confident in dealing with the city. And we said, we kept saying, we just want to do the show for 2 weeks. And they said, no, you're absolutely not getting that space back ever, because you broke in. No, and it's slated for urban renewal. That's a whole other story, because 40 years it was vacant. And, Sheldon Silver, you might have heard, he's in jail. He was, he was like a good guy, I thought. He helped get the loft law, which keeps me in occupation of my place now. But, he really was not good in many other areas. Anyways, if you would. So, that same day, my friend said, front of the building. This is not the most flattered. This is not my glamour shot. This is Ann Mesner and her then husband, Peter Monig, who's just like, oh, get her up there. So go ahead. Next slide. And there, so I plastered it on the front of the building, and it stayed there for, I guess, 3 months or something. And then Uli said, it's starting to come down, you better get it. So I did. I retrieved parts of that actual piece. And anyways, this is what led us to get ABC No Rio. And this stayed up during the time we were negotiating for what became the space that became ABC No Rio. Okay. And then a few years later, I worked with other artists, Ann Messner, Peter Fenn. I don't know. So this was the octopus. This is the octopus and Manhattan as a dead horse, which is how I saw it at that point. This all had been raised. This part of the city had been raised by Robert Moses, wanting to put
Might be hard to see the dead horse in the photo.
I know. I had another slide, but then I was trying to condense. I'll just tell you. It was like this. Okay? Its legs were like rigor mortis, the World Trade Center. Its arms were the tunnel. And then the octopus is ripping its chest cavity open, and there's a money bag in there. Okay, next slide. And then this is a tiny gouache that of a huge sculpture that I made called Brainwash in the courtyard of ABC No Rio, and it was really, it had all this like strip mining, oil tankers on fire. And I was thinking as I was like I've done a lot of portraits of things, not people, but things. And so I did these oil tankers on fire many times. And there's the bridge, the bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge in red, and this stack of bombs, and these references to strip mining, which brings electricity to the city. The guns in real life shot water at each other. It was about 20 feet long, and the bombs were 10, 11 feet tall.
What was it made of?
All different things, wood, cement.
Concrete, fiber.
Yeah, Jack is one of the second bunch of directors of ABC No Rio. What?
Circulating pump.
Yes, yeah. Anyways, go ahead. This is in a storefront window in 1984 of the oil tankers on fire. Kargan is in the Persian Gulf. That photo is by Peter Bellamy. He took the photos of the piece on the bridge too. Okay. And this is Katrina. So this is years later. I was able to still use that vocabulary. It was such a dismal time in our history, but I was really just thinking of this. I guess that was the lake there, Lake Pontchartrain, and that's Gasoline Alley. That's what fuel. That's the spine of our country, and it's a fucking mess. And so I've sort of been, these are all the oil rigs out in the water, and people dying at the sides. This Gasoline Alley, really. And so I was sort of imagining this utopian kind of solar panels up at the top of the sun. Okay. And this is in my studio. I mean, this photo is from 2007, but I was very affected when the towers came down, and I would draw it a lot. This is the skeleton that remained. Here, I went down when they were cutting it down. They torched it down. And this I was using, kind of the imagery of the horse and the legs of the World Trade Center, just like pools of blood. Those two squares. I mean, I just see it as such our supposed need for oil. Anyways, go ahead. And this is from '86. This is in the auditorium at PS1. Claudia Gould curated it, and Jane was the one who facilitated that, really. that she said.
I forgot.
Yeah, no, she said, I was doing them up in Utica at Sculpture Space. And I was bringing them down to Tom's studio to finish them. I mean, like, this is 11 feet tall. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with them. Frankly, I was up there at Sculpture Space and people kept canceling their residencies. So I kept staying and making bigger and bigger towers. And I took them, I drove like an 11-foot truck down and I took them to Tom's studio, to Deer. And then from there, Jane and Claudia, Jane said, hey, Claudia's doing, she's curating a show. It was a landscape show, so it made sense. Okay. Then the towers have traveled a lot. They were outdoors at Socrates once, and so I tarred and feathered one. This is one of the most menacing ones, but tar and feathering is in early days of our country, it was a kind of torture, like get out of town, get out of here. And so that's kind of the feeling I have when I have a love-hate thing with these towers. They're so invisible, but I find them so menacing. Okay. And this is the tree, and this is in the backyard of ABC No Rio. I just have a few more to do. The trees, when I really loved the space that we picked for ABC No Rio because there was a backyard, and there were all these trees, ailanthus trees. And they were about this big when we got the space, and it was this big around by this is in 2012 or something. It was taller than the building, and the whole building has come down now. And in the summer we had to cut the trees down, which it's very anguishing for me. But I'd always, when I was drawing the trees, I just sort of wanted to make a record of it. It's a portrait of a tree. It's a portrait of so I have portraits and interventions. That's how I was thinking of. Okay, next, please. And I put all these, I wrapped them in crepe paper for the party, for the goodbye party. And go ahead. And that was that's what the backyard looked like. It was so fantastic with all these generations of people doing tagging and writing. And this tree just was so amazing. I mean, it was its own octopus, really, this living thing. Okay. And that was the day. So by then, the building is cut down. I was asking Jack about, because that light was grown into the side of the thing. And when it was up, I kept thinking, the tree, it looks sort of like a slingshot or a wishbone or something. Okay. But now it's like, man, it's a fucking crotch, It's this immense crotch, it's 6 feet long. And so I managed to get them, to cut them at this point, and we got it into a van. It went to a show upstate. Go ahead. Next slide, please. And there it was in a barn for about 6 weeks. As a sculpture, it was, and it's pretty amazing just as a thing, So then okay, next one. Then we just brought it down to Julie's backyard, and this is one of my tries at a selfie. I don't do it very often, but I could see myself and the size of the tree and the Enterprise van and Julie's yard, because it has to season and for a couple of years. And then hopefully it will go back to, be able to be used as a bench or something. So anyways, that's it for me. Now I can talk.
That's fabulous. So, just to kind of get both of you talking together, did you think a little bit about the first time, what you might remember of some of the early moments when you might have met one another? Was it around the real estate show, do you think, or was it maybe before that?
No, because I must have I met Jane through Charlie.
Okay.
I mean, I knew John first, and then I met Charlie, and then I met Jane. Right?
Yeah,
That makes sense.
and Charlie and I met in 78.
Yeah, so
We must have met in 78, but Charlie and Becky and a lot of CoLab people had been in the Whitney program.
Right.
I
you
always
were not.
say I wasn't. I feel like I did Whitney by proxy.
yeah, but I didn't know them then. They were before me.
They were right before you.
Yeah.
Was Yvonne Rayner still and Donald Judd affiliated when you were there? Or no?
No. Well, Yvonne Rayner is affiliated. Maybe she gave a presentation or something, but she was a little more involved later.
Okay.
Yeah. Don Judd, I never had any contact with.
So,
We don't remember how we met, but we were just
We
part
were-
of
we
a
were in
gang.
the- We were probably going to parties, and were you in the Manifesto show and that?
The Manifesto show was one of the only collab shows I didn't contribute to, which collab shows, anybody could propose an idea, and the Manifesto show was Jenny Holzer's idea, because she does manifestos. She was like, anybody want to do a manifesto?
Colleen Fitzgibbon's 5.
Space, yes. Yes, but, and to me, what was fantastic about these collab shows was it was kind of like trying on your friend's clothes in high school, where you go, well, let me see how I look, and, could I rock this?
That's a good way to describe it.
And so I would, I was in the dog show, I was not in the doctors and dentists. I was in a lot of shows, but I was like a manifesto. Words aren't my thing, so I didn't participate in. I went to it, but I didn't come up with a manifesto.
Yeah, the dog show was the first show I was in New York. So maybe we met
And me
there.
too, so
Yeah,
we must-
We probably met there at a party. That was at Robin Winter's Loft on Broadway in Houston.
And did you go to the doctors and dentists? The Batman show was the first
No,
one?
I sort of heard, maybe I heard about it through John. I'm not sure. I don't remember.
well,
It's lost in the mist of time.
one of the things that you're both showing in your slides, but also what you talked about, is just how New York felt a bit like an open, a playground. It just, you used the word abandoned, or, it just didn't seem, set the way it seems now, and we experience it now. And yet New York was so vast, it still is, a large city. So talk a little bit about your relationship to the city, and why you felt maybe a sense of freedom to utilize the city in maybe ways we really can't do now.
I've always lived downtown. I mean, I moved here from Pennsylvania and moved to Perry Street, and then did sublet all over, sublet on Duane Street. With the Whitney program, my studio was on Reed Street for a year and a half. I rode my bike everywhere. I was around, I'd forgotten you lived on Fulton Street. I biked around there. You'd go to restaurants. There'd be, at Sloppy Louie's, there'd be longshoremen with hooks sitting there having soup, kale soup. I don't know, there weren't that many people here. I mean, it's so loud now. It is so loud. There's so much construction. It's cranes and everybody on top of each other. It's like living in Midtown in Tribeca. It's worse because it's so much building. But there was a sense of freedom. I just felt, it was youth too.
Yeah, sure.
And I guess I would add to that when the 70s was it was the economic model of the 40s and 50s had sort of disintegrated in the 60s, and it was just gone by the 70s. And all the things that we think of downtown now, like, redeveloped seafronts. There were no seaports. That company that did this
Dallas.
seaport and Boston and, Philadelphia, they've done every seaport, and they're all the same. No one had thought of any of that yet. So there were these little sort of dying businesses. Like if you walked from NYU down to the Mud Club, for example, down Broadway at night, there were no lights, there were no stores open. All that was on Broadway were these wholesale fabric companies. And then in the window would be kind of all covered in dust, because they were sort of the last dregs of what had been a vibrant industry. But when this neighborhood was all textile sweatshops. But the sweatshops were all gone. There were the few, like the very last fabric store closed last year that was just down here below. And where I lived was the Dairy and Eggs building. Washington Market had been the wholesale market, and then they had gotten rid of it when they built Independence Plaza, and that was gonna be a whole, but then the economy tanked, and so no one had, the other thing is that all of these kind of independent spaces like Apex or Artist Space was just starting, but there, you know, like now for young artists, there's all these post-grad and, you know, residencies, and everything has sort of been professionalized. And no one had thought of that. There were no restaurant chains. It was just like if you wanted to make a coffee shop, and there actually weren't any yet then, there was just bad coffee at Dave's Corner. You know, you just, nothing was self-conscious and in quotation marks about itself, like pretty much everything is now. And no one had thought to develop real estate. So no one had, so you could go, gee, why doesn't somebody think of buying one of these crummy old buildings? And everybody be like, well, why would you want to do that? You know, so it was wide open in that way because, you know, the city was bankrupt, Ford had said, drop dead, and basically the people in power had moved up to the suburbs, and I don't know, people just thought it was going to shrivel up and vanish. So nobody cared, you know, if Becky did a sculpture in, you know, there was nobody from the city who was going to go, what are you doing there? It was only when we invaded, you know,
A building.
a future, something that someone had tagged as this is what I want to develop. But there wasn't even very much of that.
You know, I was thinking also because you know, obviously I was looking at an earlier period with the artist galleries that were more in the East Village, where the in the 50s and early 60s, there were so many women artists involved, and of course, you know, when you got here, there were that generation of female artists were still around. Many of them teaching in schools around here. You guys didn't go to, you know, you weren't at, you know, Cooper or Brooklyn College or Queens College, where a lot of women ended up getting teaching positions. But do you remember spending time with, you worked with Nancy Graves and some other artists, but do you remember spending time with female artists who had active studios who were about a decade, 15, 20 years older than you, and what impact that might maybe made in the way you thought about being an artist in the city?
Well, I was lucky. You know, it's always, how do you move to New York? And I'd been on this thing in Provincetown. That was my first artist residency at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and a woman artist who'd been visiting at Syracuse, Judith Rothschild, told me about it.
Was there a foundation after Judith Rothschild?
After she died,
Yes.
there was.
Okay.
But she told me about Fine Arts Work Center, and there I met, I didn't even, you know, I was so really out of it and naive about so many things. Jack Tworkov was there. I didn't realize what it meant to be the head of the Yale Art School. He was like a really nice guy. He was associate in Myron Stout. They were like the elders of this group. So we'd have visits with them and hang out. And I went back to get some of my stuff. And I just popped in on Jack Tworkov. Oh, you know, he was like, never mind. But he had a younger artist visiting him, and that artist made a list. He said, you need a job in New York. Well, some of my friends might need work, so I call, he goes, here, he made a list. It was all women, Nancy Graves, Barbara Kruger, I mean, though, you know, like that. And I called all of them. Nancy was and I met half of them. I mean, I've known Barbara Kruger for a long time. But Nancy was the one who needed work. Now, she wasn't gonna sit down and talk up with me about stuff very much. But she changed my life because she said, go to the Whitney program. You know, at your age, you need community. And I didn't know what that meant. I mean, I didn't go to grad school because people said, oh, sculpture, I mean, it's just about tools. Buy your own tools. What do you need grad school for? Really? And so that was the path I had been on. But when it was, you know, she was very helpful in getting me in this situation that was a little more, and she lived in the heart of Soho. And at that time, you know, Soho had happened. People were selling. I mean, people were, you know, I'm contradicting you a bit, but she had a block-to-block loft.
Wow.
And artists had sold, you know, artists were profiting off other artists. They had sold, you know, I worked in lofts. I worked as a plumber and doing drywall. I worked for Nancy. I worked for Charles Ross upstairs. I worked for Pat Steer. So, you know, I was working for them, building their lofts, partly. And it wasn't really, you know, but also I wasn't really, from my experience in Provincetown, I had thought, oh, you wouldn't want to show your work until you were like 40 or 50. I mean, really, that wasn't, you know, showing my work when I was right out of grad school wasn't anything. And plus, I lived in Japan as an undergrad, and they're like, you know, I said, where do you get the clay? And he goes, oh, from the mountain. You know, he was 78 generations of potters. You know, they take a long time to learn things there. So that was my thing. You know, you get to do something and then you show it. It's not, I mean, I wasn't very process oriented. I wanted to make sculpture and public sculpture. So I'm rambling a little bit, but you know, I rode my bike everywhere. And there were such open spaces. But the way female, it was the female curators who were out there. I think Marcia Tucker, Alana Heiss, Anita Contini. They were working with men, but they got public land to use. Creative Time. I mean, Mimi in Ruckus, Manhattan built this huge thing which I loved going to. You know. The city was itself, I didn't grow up in a city. The city itself as a machine or as a living organism, you know, was fascinating to me. I mean, I think you must, I can't imagine living in Times Square, but it's a whole different, thing, you know?
I thought we had moved to the country.
Yeah. When you came down here, yeah. I mean, there used to be wild fields of cattails and red-winged blackbirds and ponds with pollywogs when I crossed West Street. There was a lot of wild stuff. I mean, there were empty lots where plants grew, where life replenished itself in a way that there's no place anymore.
Right, and I think that was in part of the city's, you know, probably some master plan in the mayor's office of wanting to put in roads, build other buildings. Some of that demolition started in the mid-'60s, first for the World Trade Center, but then for these big highway projects that the community opposed. But then, right, what do you do after you've knocked all these buildings down and nothing's getting built? Nature takes over.
Yeah, well, there was communities down there. There was like Little Syria. There were electronics stores. There were things that got displaced. Yeah. I want to see this book, Danny Lyon, the photographer. He made a book on the destruction of Lower Manhattan. Right. I'm curious to see that. I just heard about it. But, you know, like there was stuff before the World Trade Center.
Yeah, no,
you know?
Absolutely. No,
that got displaced, the
right.
same way Robert Moses displaced neighborhoods on the Lower East Side.
Right. And Jane, what about your relationship then to just negotiating around the art world and the people who, you know, were already downtown for years before you came onto the scene?
Well, for me, the day, my older brother had already moved to New York, and so when I finished school in Boston, all my teachers would go, what are you going to do when you finish? And I'd go, I don't know, go to New York. And they go, they eat young girls alive in New York. Don't go there. You'll be destroyed. And I thought, yeah, what have I got to lose? I'll give it a whirl. My big brother is there anyway. So I went and slept. He had a studio apartment in the Upper West Side. And for a week and a half, or 2 weeks, I slept on his living room floor. But the day that I walked into his apartment, he handed me a piece of paper and said, this person's just called and said, call her back. And it was Susan Pitt, who had been my teacher, animation teacher at college, and she was offering me an animation job. So, the next day I started working downtown full time, and I would say that through Susan I know everybody that I know now. And Susan was very close to Mimi and Red, and I got to know Mimi, and they were both really generous to me, and I felt like I was an instant part of a community that, you know, continues to extend. And they were, you know, Mimi, I said that I was interested in, I had done printmaking in school, and she used to live on a loft on Mulberry Street that she and Red had together. And she said, oh, my upstairs neighbor is living in Italy, but she gave me the key to her apartment, and she's got an etching press if you want to use it. Here's the key. So and the woman was K.K. Kane, who was the sister of the former Governor Kane of New Jersey. Mm-hmm. She was like the black sheep. They kept sending her to, because she was kind of a wild thing, evidently.
Oh, that's KK.
KK is
Oh,
Governor
okay.
Kane's sister. So she had you know, she had it like that. She had a house in Italy. So I just used KK's beautiful loft for like a year, and I'd invite Kiki would come over, Philippe Hagen, and we'd make prints. And being who I am, I never messed it up. We didn't, you know, stay overnight. We didn't throw parties. I just make prints there, and you know, so whatever, you know, I'd mention something and Mimi would go, oh, you should talk to my friend this. And back in the day, we used to do that. And sometimes I'd be like when we did the Times Square show, Mimi'd be like, oh, and we were doing happenings. And I'd think, don't tell me. I felt like I wanted it to be like, you know, we had invented sex and drugs and rock and roll, and I wanted to think we had invented art too. And so the idea that she wanted to tell me they had already done it, I was like, but, you know, I got over that. But I wanted to say one other thing is I remember that those women did not get attention in the 70s. And even though they were a decade older than us, they started getting attention in the 80s, because that was a time when the world was beginning to contemplate giving women art attention, except for very, very few people like Eva Hesse. So the people like Yvonne Jacquet, who was much older than me, but she was my peer professionally, because she was just starting to show a year or two before me. And when I remember talking to her once and going, well, you know, how did you juggle having children and having a career? And she said, honestly, we never thought about having a career. It just was impossible. So we would make our paintings and we'd sit around in the playground with our children and talk, and we didn't anguish about it because it seemed impossible. And then, because I really wanted to have children, I remember also turning to Judy Rifka, who was just a little older than us, but had children early. And I was like, Judy, what's the right time to have children? Should you do it before you have a career, or should you do it after you're established? And she turned to me and she said, Jane, there is no good time to have children. She said, whenever you would do it, it's going to be hard. It's like, thank you, Judy. And, you know, she was a single mom, and it was really hard. And she's now somebody who's having sort of a comeback, a second career, now that her kids are grown, and she has lovely sons who I think are very supportive of her. But raising them alone was a struggle.
But some of what you're kind of raising here is just this idea that your generation, which is a generation of, you know, Vietnam, and, you know, second wave feminism, the fact that there are these amazing women like Alana Heiss and others who know how to negotiate the bureaucracy that is New York City to kind of, and have that ambition to get these places to do these things. It's a different world you're commanding with, and you both have this different consciousness about it, perhaps, than some of the older women artists that you got to know. Is that a fair?
Well, I didn't meet I didn't know Mimi in those days. I knew of Ruckus Manhattan, but I didn't know her until much later. And I met Nancy and Pat and Marcia Tucker then, but they weren't, it wasn't like sisterhood is powerful, you know, these women they weren't particularly supporting women. They were working to further the career of men, basically. I mean, that's how it seemed to me. Also, you know, I was on this much more naive plane, you know, I wasn't promoting myself in that way. But, I mean, I read an interview with Alana Heiss recently online someplace. Klaus Biesenbeck was interviewing her, and she's like, forget artist space and these I wasn't going to feel sorry for any artist like artist space does. You know, I'm like, really? Oh, Joe, and Joe works there. Let's hope it wasn't with Joe. But I wanted to deal with movers and shakers, and I'm like, oh, okay. You know, I didn't feel, they were older too. I mean, they were not, it wasn't a warm and friendly place, as I recall, you know? So, I mean, but she has done amazing stuff. I have tremendous respect for her.
Right.
But it wasn't an atmosphere of women, you know, women working together. I didn't feel that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not trying to suggest that it was that way precisely. It's just this idea of a kind of sense of what is possible that in the generation that's you know, 15, 20 years older than you, talking with the women, you know, and again, they're reflecting at age 70 or at age 80 that this idea was they would just continue to show at the galleries that they were operating, and it just seemed perfectly normal after a while that the men would get taken, and some of the women would just rationalize, well, I guess my work isn't strong enough yet to be, you know, represented commercially, until a bit later, until comparing notes with other women, and until this idea of gender bias, you know, is made more of a dominant discussion.
I want to at this point mention Nancy Sparrow, who was, to me, very generous and inspiring, and she was even older than a lot of these other women we've been talking about, and she also was just getting recognized in the 80s. So again, she was 15 years, 20 years older than me, but she was sort of a peer who's a little ahead. And I found that she, you know, that yes, there were women who wanted to be identified with the power brokers, and the power brokers were men. And there were a lot of women who were like, okay, I slipped in as the only woman, I'm shutting the door behind me, you know, you're not coming in on my coattails. You're gonna have to do it on your own. But then there were women like, I remember Nancy at one point, Charlie had done a little documentary on Kiki Smith, and he had done one on me, and Nancy's like, I'm going to invite all my curator friends, and we'll do a screening of Charlie's movies for you and Kiki to, you know, introduce you to my world, which was an incredibly generous thing. It was her, but she was very much part of the women's movement, and she was an exciting model for me because she had started out with AIR and sort of the women's separatist thing, and then she had gone into the super mainstream. And also, I met her when I curated her into this Public Art Fund project of Spectacolor in '82, and her project was censored by my boss and didn't run, but when she said, when I mentioned something about my boyfriend, she goes, oh, let's double date. And then she and Leon and Charlie and I double dated until they passed away, and they had 3 sons, and so Leon would always go, 2 kids, when are you gonna have that 3rd one? That's when it gets interesting. And to me, they were a really important model that you could have 2 artists who both had significant careers and had children. Because before that, I would look around and go, nobody, there's no one who does that. That's impossible. It's, you know, the ego thing. It's not easy to have a career where both people are getting attention. And they, you know, I was meeting them late in their life. They seemed to have it worked out. I don't know how it was for them earlier, but they were, you know, very supportive of each other, and that was really touching.
That's great. Now, and then just about your studios then. I love the images of Jane, you're kind of, you know, hobnobbing through the different studios. How is it having a studio here in the city, in Manhattan? You know, you both have been in Manhattan. I was just walking here, I just can't believe all the noise. Just constant construction right now. But, you know, it ebbs and flows, I suppose. But how much does Is your do you think that your studio is the place where you can turn off everything out there, and just have a place to think, independent of the city, or do you find that the city automatically creeps in? I mean, I see the city in both your work all the time, but I also know that your reference points go far vastly beyond the city as well.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things I did early on which were really about mapping and, walking the city and mapping it and trying to depict it in some way and to intervene at some points. But also a lot of, like, the towers were done outside of the city. I did a lot of residencies, but I just got sick of packing up for a while and stopped doing it. I did I did a residency at Robert Rauschenberg's Captiva. I was the pilot thing there, and it was great to be with birds and trees and natural light. And it's just so loud. I was thinking this morning, like, oh, I always wanted to work with water. And, but I didn't think of it as engulfing the city, as drowning, as, having to leave, and that might be in the future. I mean, because I can't, my place is a basement. I can't physically, I never imagined it would be, imperiled in that way. Nothing happened at Sandy. But, I'm a tenant, and half of my building has changed now, the owners, and it's like living in a college dorm a lot of the time. Like, turn it, please, the music, it's loud, please. Last week there were people like fucking in the windows in the courtyard, like, it's like I feel like I'm just, like, who wants to hear other people fucking? Not me. And so, I'm sorry, it's a very dense neighborhood now. And before, it was very wild. And, I had a sense of, I'm thinking I'm just going to have to get a set of those, the things that, the headphones, the sound, because I can't take it. I mean, really, I'm like, how can I get out of here? I mean, lots of times I'm not very happy and calm in my studio. And, I used to use music a lot, but I've been in the same place for over 40 years, it's a long time.
Yes.
So, and I've worked in other places, but a lot of my thoughts are like, how can I get out of here? Not like, oh, it's so great being here.
Right. I relate, yep.
Because it's the quality of life in New York is not so great, and I think noise is the worst thing.
It's extremely
As my
noisy.
No, they live on the next block over. It's just.
It's definitely noisy on your street too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of construction.
We've had constant construction for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Literally constant
Yeah.
construction. Either the building behind us, next to us, or across the street is always, or the street is being torn up. And yes. And I didn't think about our proximity to the Holland Tunnel when I moved there, but in the last 5 years, the traffic backup by our house has gotten to be extraordinary, and the honking and like I go to yoga over on Broadway, and just negotiating through several snakings of the angry tunnel traffic to go to yoga, where I'm going to relax for an hour and a half, and then I've got to fight, and I'm like, even sometimes I'm like, I'm walking in your, but the heat and the frustration level, you can't walk through it without being like. And one other thing, this is not a frustration exactly, but just one of the key changes to me of this neighborhood was that after 9/11, when all the new high-rise residential units came in this neighborhood, suddenly we have all these designer dogs. It's like until 2001, everyone had a mutt in this neighborhood. And like I went to the farmer's market this morning, and everything is, whatever the dogs are. People have these insane, mastiff, giant things that look like, they can barely restrain them. They're like huge muscle. I'm like, I'm going to stand the other side of the street from you, or else they got these tiny.
Yeah,
but
that's
there must be a sign somewhere. You cannot have a mutt in Tribeca anymore. You got your new $8 million apartment, and you must have the dog statement of your personality, and then you also must have a double wide, insane, top of the line stroller. Yes. And all those people are like, coming through, the prince is coming through, and the princess, everyone must step aside. And I'm like, when my kids were little, you knew all the other kids, and you'd see a kid, you go, hi. If you wave at one of the princes or princesses, people are like, oh my God, it's a child snatcher. And I'm like, I'm your next door neighbor, and I'm an old lady. I'm sorry I smiled at you. And we have a very fancy private school that has its bus stop now on my doorstep. So they're all there, and they're like, excuse me, we're princes and princesses, and you must be a peon. We will not acknowledge your existence while we're cluttering up your doorway. And I'm like, give us a little rest here.
It's like this whole new place from the years since you've been here,
Well,
to say the least.
part of it is just getting older. Part, the people were hanging at the Cedar Tavern. There were 10 artists, and they thought, oh, the art world is huge if there's 50 people,
Right.
And then there's this. The population has just kept growing. The city's kept growing, and I remember going to a show at Pace on 57th Street. And it was a great show. It was Bonnard and Rothko.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the
But
color.
the line went around the block. I'm like, this is something is different now. Art is so popular in a way. But I don't know. I still get this feeling living in this neighborhood. Like I can't afford to eat in any of the restaurants. And a lot of them have outdoor cafes. It's so bad. I'm always tempted to sort of just snack. Could I have a piece of bread? I don't, but there's a feeling, like, who? I just don't know. I'd like to be in a neighborhood where I could go to a restaurant.
Right. No, Manhattan is really
It's
just this. What did Jack Smith say? It's like a rented island or something. That dreams of a rented island.
Gentrification.
And it's gentrification, absolutely.
But it's also income inequality.
Yeah.
That's a separate thing. That is one of the biggest changes.
Yeah.
Plus the digital life. When I got my recent cable, they raised it, and I said, I wonder what if I just resign? What if I just don't? If I call them and cut. Because I don't get cable TV. I would just be trapped in my house then. But if I didn't have Wi-Fi in my house, I might like that. Just to be here, and I'm late to get a phone, but it's like I want to live in my body, not in this region. So that is a huge change. And I have been watching the Vietnam series.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm kind of reliving going, I was in high school then. I remember, my first I can remember, this demonstration when we invaded Cambodia. It's just, as you live a long time, things do change. A lot of times I sound like someone at the Cedar Bar, well, what's up with all these people and why are it so loud? And, but I don't know. I'm more sensitive to noise now than
Yeah, no, I
have
think that.
excellent hearing. I have dog hearing. I have the hearing of a dog.
That's why you were in the dog, that exhibition at that collab. Immediate affinity. Well, and then I just think that, and then I'd like to have our friends ask questions. But one last thing, just why do you think a collab means so much to successive generations of artists and curators? That was an amazing show at Hunter College. I want to say a few years ago. It was just a few years ago, right? That they reprised some the history of it. Maybe like what it meant to you, but why do you think it still endures as a real focal point for so many people who think about art in New York?
I'll start if you're. Collab was a very dynamic, loosely knit group of young artists whose interests intersected, but it was not like started by one person with a program. So that even though none of the three of us here founded it, we could all be very influential and come into it and go, oh, it could be what I want it to be, and I'll, in certain aspects, and I'll organize this and you'll organize that. And so in a way it was a perfect utopia. It was tons of fighting. Everybody would fight about everything because there wasn't like a leader and a party line. So it was kind of like a perfect intersection. It couldn't last for that reason. There are not that many organizations. Art is a very ego-driven, dog-eat-dog. I'm going to get out in front here, not you, or you're going to get out in front and I'm going to be a player hater. But it was a moment where there didn't seem to be anything that there was no prize yet to fight for, so everyone was like, let's just do this and see what happens. And I don't know, it seemed like it was always a really interesting group of people. Like, I took a lot of photos because I thought, this is going to be important someday. These people are amazing. And I wish I had taken more photos, but what I took, like sometimes you feel like this is going to be historic. And so I feel like younger people look at it and go, well, how can we, and there was this sense of agency. Mm-hmm. We could just make it up and do it. That is harder to do now, but I think is still attractive. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the women were very strong in Collab,
Yeah.
So it was interesting developing friendships there. I didn't particularly have mentor relationships, but I had very intense relationships with the women in Collab. My Ann Mesner, who lived down here too, there was a time when we were talking a lot, and doing projects to sort of show off for each other. And I don't know. What was the question again?
Just like, why do you, thinking about your own relationship to it, why do you think?
Because it was fun.
Fun.
Really, it was like, we're going to do this now we're going to do this, now we're going to do this. Is this, how many people want to do this? It was a free-for-all. And but really it was fun. And it was a time, whether it was our age or it was a time in New York, it felt like things were wide open. And sometimes I see that among the younger artists. Like when I did that show at No More Games in Brooklyn in the Donut District, it seemed like a lot of those people were, they were interested in working collaboratively and doing pop-up things. And it's fun to see it. It's just fun to have this ebb and flow of the creative life. But artist movements don't last all that long, No. Just traditionally they don't. I was thrilled I was in the downtown show, that was like 2007.
Jane, you were too.
For me, that was the part of this, that was the beginning of this, let's look at the past.
Mm-hmm.
There was, so much, almost everything I've shown since then is work from the past. Mm-hmm. It's true. So as you get older, you see, okay, I would like to see a Collab show at the Met. Or MoMA's got the Club 57. The Met did, they did the Pictures Generation. Collab deserves and needs a full-out show at a major institution. Mm-hmm. Met Breuer, hello? I'm down with it, because we have so much material of the collaborative nature of the video mm-hmm. that we did and the sound stuff. Well, It's true. I mean, some people are trying to do a traveling show, you know, or parts of it. I don't know if that'll work, but it's interesting to people because it's more interesting, I think, than seeing another show of a white male artist. You know, it's more interesting to younger generation of people. I mean, same way with the ABC No Rio, as Joe has told me, that it's more interesting and inspiring to younger artists. You know, in a way, the real estate show wouldn't have meant anything unless we had ABC No Rio. And we own the building now. I mean, we will own this new building, and this will live on way past me, a toehold in this Disneyland of Manhattan. You know, I mean, it's like, it's a freedom that will exist at that space for theater and shows and performances. And the best shows that I've seen are at the Brooklyn Museum. I mean, the lynching show, which closes on the 8th, is fantastic. It's racial terrorism in America. I mean, I had no idea. I mean, I have never been south of Virginia, you know, and to see the map of the lynchings, you know, our history, I mean, our national history, that and watching Vietnam has been just incredibly moving to me. I'm sorry, I'm going off topic a little bit, but, you know, it's like, that's the reality of life in 2017, whether I live in downtown, uptown, in New York or Pittsburgh. You know, it's like this country is in a real crisis.
Yeah.
You know, and so whatever addresses that, I'm with it. You know, because there's so much I need to learn and really change my own ways. You know, in the past I would always be happy telling people to change their ways. You know, and now I'm more interested in what can I do to change things in my life, you know. So,
No, that's nice. Well, let's see if
that's
there's.
about it.
Yes. Check.
I don't know if this is a question or not, but I'm not sure your response. One of the most interesting things is how you talk about like the multiple cross points in your social and work life and art life, without necessarily being able to pinpoint like exactly where you met. But I'm thinking about Jane and how I know your work, which was through the loft on Broadway and Houston Street. What's about, you used to call us the Peter Fenn Dance Company because I think we were there at the behest of Peter Fenn.
I forgot you were in that. Oh my God.
Yeah. And it was, I think it was a shared loft, similar to ABC No Rio, where there must have been a leaseholder, but it was a collab space. And I remember seeing your paintings all over the wall. It inspired like a lot of the performances and choreography that we did. And then simultaneously, ABC No Rio, where, you know, I know Becky, of course, as being like the generation that took the baton running No Rio. So what I'm interested in is what that crossing is between collab and ABC No Rio, and more importantly, what it isn't. Because it seems that listening to you talk, that there's like these very clear, not only distinctions, but distances of both activities, and both as like organizations or grouping. So I think that's kind of what I'm interested in, is the vagueness or the like the kind of blurriness around this idea that you have these spaces. And I say you have these spaces because I'm following what Becky's train of thought, that ABC No Rio does exist and it will exist. We don't know what it's going to be. And Collab still exists as a 501c3, as an organization. So my question is about like where is this nexus? And both in relationship to the past and what you see as the present and future, and where you see your direction with the current generation in relationship to these models that you've set that are not necessarily these solid patterns of things.
Wow. It's a huge and fascinating question. And I'm going to say, first of all, that loft on Broadway, it was next to Robin's, I think Robin, it was Robin, part of Robin Winter's
I
loft.
don't think so. It was a few buildings down. I remember Fend.
Peter Fend had the lease.
Peter Fenn, Peter Monick, and then
It was?
there would be Coab, like Coab would meet there.
Colab met there, but for my understanding of it, and I was clearly shocked when you guys were dancing there, because originally it was Peter Fenn's loft. And all of Colab meetings were in different people's lofts, which didn't mean they were a public space. It was just, we're gonna have this meeting in my house, and well, the next meeting in yours. And I showed that picture of, I rented Susan's loft, I used Kiki's loft, I used many people's lofts when they were away. I was paying rent to Peter to use that studio. And then I came in one day and you guys were dancing, and I'm like, wow. And then Peter's like, oh yeah, well, I don't know if he was renting it to you guys or letting you use it. And I'm like, it was part of some free-form thing, which maybe we all did at times, of promising too many things to too many people. And I was like, oh, we're having a collab meeting here, and I have these paintings that I'm not sure what I'm doing with up. I was like, this actually isn't a good situation for me to work, although it's nice that everybody's getting to see this work in progress. And as far as what it was and what it wasn't, I'm very excited about making, my primary interest is making work and intersecting with people that excite me. And in that way, I've been fairly, I don't know if you call it Catholic, I'm a magpie. I've always had a number of different, so I was really involved with Colab, but it was never my only base. And when the opportunity for the No Rio came up, we had a meeting, and Becky and Ann and all those people were like, the city wants to give us a building. Does Colab want to have a building? And most of us were like, no, that seems like a lot of work. And I was always delighted that you guys did it. But by then I had a day job. I'd had at least one major operation. When I was looking through photos, I had pictures of you in the hospital and pictures of me in the hospital. I thought that's not the message I want to send. But, life was already getting complicated. I was having kids, and I was like, I cannot be in charge of some kind of space. I don't have the time or energy for it. So I like to pitch in where I can, but I don't want to be in charge.
Actually, when I met you, that show at 9:20, that isn't what I had in that show, the piece you described. I had two pieces, one at each end of Exit Art. I'll show you pictures sometime.
Yeah.
I know what you're talking about, but it wasn't there. But I feel so lucky that the alternative spaces in New York have been so expansive, and I showed at Artist Space a number of times. I showed at Exit Art. I went to a thing at PS1 the other night for Papo Colo. It was a benefit for Puerto Rico, and Papo Colo was there. Who had Exit Art, just that artists could start their own nonprofits was such an amazing thing, and for me, really, I don't know what it has to do with younger artists, but for me, I love doing one-person shows, and I have not done very many of them in my life. And that's what I want to do. I mean, really, I want to do that. And it's the most educational thing for me. And I've been in tons of group shows, and I'm very proud of ABC No Rio. I really am, because it will live on past me. And for my work, who knows? I could be just a dumpster away. I mean, I'm interested in getting museums to acquire my work. They will preserve my work. And Colab's main thing was no curators. No curators. We'll do it ourselves. But you know what? I like curators. The old thing of a curator is a friend. And that is, I have had fantastic conversations with curators. I mean, some of the young curators I've met, I just love them. They make they're helping me to achieve my vision. So, I mean, I've changed from when I was a young artist and only wanted to work with artists and only thought that artists were creative, right? I mean, I'm much more like, why do I want to do this? If No Rio, I probably wouldn't do ABC No Rio now, you know, but I'm so glad I did, because common sense was not a real strong point. Let me just put it that way. Thank God. You know, I mean, like getting that tree is like one of the nuttiest things but you know, I really try to work on my intuition, and that's what I think, you know, younger artists, you know, that's the best thing, is like, to thine own self be true. I mean, what else is there?